Tony will be talking about his latest book, which is set in Rome and called In Bruno's Shadow. I'm going to speak about one of his earlier masterpieces, published in the mid-1980s, Heart of the Order. The novel is structured around America's pastime, and the baseball title which refers to the strongest part of a team's lineup. But it also refers to Tony's protagonist, Danny Bacigalupo, his heart of passion, and the order that he tries to make of his life after a tragic event in his childhood on the north side of the city. Baseball is an apt analogy for the book because it's all about home. It's protection, focus, and the reward you receive when you travel around the bases and return in triumph to home. It is a game analogous to life where failure is more often encountered than success, where if you get a hit, 1/3 of the time you're considered a star, where you are sometimes under intense pressure as an individual to perform, and at other times you have to sacrifice yourself for the good of the team, where you're either safe or out. It has followed the life of our society while being a strict guardian of its traditions, and has been a progressive avenue of acceptance for immigrant-rooted players and breaking the color barrier as a vanguard of civil rights. But Mr. Ardizzone's book is beyond sport. It is about neighborhood, where the street you are on defines your world, where everyone lives in everyone else's pocket, and where judgment, pain, and isolation compete against joy, love, and togetherness. An author's received advice is to write what you know, and that's at work here. Everything he writes about Olive Street and the people who live there, his experience in Christian Brothers High School, rings true. He made me laugh and cry as the book evoked my own childhood on the north side of the city and at St. Pat's High. It made me think of my knee popping out of place after connecting for a sure triple at California Park that resulted in me collapsing in a heap in the batter's box and being ingloriously tagged out as I waited for the ambulance to take me to Quilico Hospital. Danny Bacigalupo's tragic accident in an alley pickup game turns his world upside down and is illustrated by the most sensitive and realistic treatment of PTSD, bipolar, schizoid behavior I've ever read. After the accident, he becomes ill, and this deepens his isolation. Our protagonist cannot put this event behind him as he plays in the minor leagues, alternately performing brilliantly and then freezing up with paralyzing fear as the memory of his role in the tragedy literally looms before him like the ghost in Hamlet. Because of this, he always feels like an outsider, and his only friend is a black shortstop named Book Johnson, who Danny bonds with over the discrimination he faces in Mississippi. The book brilliantly examines his relationships with his childhood sweetheart, a Polish girl who uses food as her escape, and an affair with a Mary Magdalene figure while in the minor leagues that makes him a father, giving new purpose and faith in the future. We see the evolution of American society through the hard times in his childhood into the generation of peace and love. The event at the end of the book, when Danny finally makes it to the bigs, are surprising but provide a logical and satisfying ending. Here's a taste of his impeccable prose about growing up in a Chicago neighborhood. On the city's north side, on a street named Olive, in the middle of a solid neighborhood of working class Irish, Germans, and Poles, with a few Italian families like ours sprinkled here and there, like basil for flavor, everyone lived in gray or red brick two-flats. Upstairs lived the tenants, preferably old people who didn't smell and who treaded their hallway quietly. The front of every house had a porch that faced a tree. Everybody except the old people and the Meenans and the Jankowskis had a new baby every year or so. At first, we babies stumbled around our tiny backyards, eating grass and twigs and pebbles too large to stick in our nostrils, and crunchy paint chips from the wooden garages that opened into the "stay away from there, do you hear me" alley. Touching fingers to the tilted square gaps in the chain link fences that separated us, careful not to trample our father's tomato plants. Then we were promoted to the front yards, where we were yelled at by everyone, because the new open spaces turned us into a herd of stampeding buffaloes, and everyone had just planted marigolds or snapdragons or new grass seed. Perhaps because they were trained to be dainty, the girls at once obeyed, but we boys had no control over our shoes, so we fled and graduated ourselves to the alley. Every week in the New York Times Review of Books, there's an article, and they interview an author, and the last question is, what author, living or dead, or 3 authors, living or dead, would you invite to a dinner party? I don't know about the other 2, but I definitely would invite Tony. Who knows? Maybe he cooks as well as he writes. Thank you.
Tony, if you can hear me, you're on.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you so much, Terry. Thank you for the beautiful introduction. Thank you, Dominic and Anna and everyone at Casa Italia.
Recording in progress.
I should add that I met Dominic years ago and he very much helped me. He gave me books. He helped me learn what it means to be an Italian-American writer. Is the volume and picture, is everything acceptable? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so things are fine?
Yes.
No.
You can hear me and see me and everything there is all right. I'm very grateful to be invited and to be able to participate through Zoom. I'm in Portland, Oregon, where I live. And I have about a 10-minute talk. I'd like to talk about my new book. It's called In Bruno's Shadow. It was published by Guernica. It just came out. Guernica is up in Canada. So let me start. I'd like to pull back the curtain and talk about my novel In Bruno's Shadow and the way it came to be as I wrote it. In 2003, I went to Rome over Christmas, partly to celebrate the holidays, but really to search for inspiration for a new book. I wanted my imagination to be stimulated. I wanted aspects of Rome to trigger a new creative impulse in me. Rome's art and architecture were my reward. When I saw Caravaggio's painting, The Calling of St. Matthew, I knew I was onto something. If you don't know the work, the painting has Christ and St. Peter come to tax accountant Matthew's counting house and point to him, calling him to follow them. Christ is barefoot, and he and Peter are dressed as they were dressed in their own time, in biblical times. Matthew and the others are dressed as they would be at the time that Caravaggio painted them, 1599. I was drawn to the interplay between the two time periods. This gave me the idea to write a story about North Americans in the 21st century who visit San Luigi dei Francesi, the church where the 3 early Caravaggios hang, and then for a narrative of the painting to duplicate itself, or call to them, in their 21st century lives. I saw that this was a way that I could use specific elements of Rome to inspire stories about contemporary characters. Most writers use setting as a background, as a kind of tone setter. I wanted to put setting in the forefront and use it as a generator. In another story, I used the optical illusion of the ceiling and dome in Sant'Ignazio, where you can see both a flat ceiling and a dome, and then if you move to the right spots on the floor, the paintings take on both height and depth. You see what seems to be an actual vaulted ceiling and dome. So I created a character who deliberately works to let others see her in two different ways. Another story. Bernini's St. Teresa in Ecstasy offered me a real challenge. This piece shows a woman who seems overcome by the ecstasy of grace, but at the same time her expression is often compared to a woman who's having an orgasm. The statuary is both sacred and sexually charged, and Bernini added a pair of boxes where 6 men are watching as if they're in a theater, as if what's happening before them is a performance. That adds voyeurism to the mix. That triggered another chapter. For a while, I thought I was writing a book of separate stories, connected only by the fact that they all take place in Rome. But when I returned to Rome the following year, 2004, again at Christmas time, I was in the Piazza Navona on the morning of the Southeast Asian earthquake and tsunami. The square felt different. In every church and public building, I saw flyers and appeals for tsunami relief. Even Pasquino, the stone statue that Romans for centuries have used to air their complaints and desires and hopes, had poems written about the tragedy taped onto it. In the Piazza Navona, the sun was shining, the air was cold. I walked around the fountain of the Four Rivers, and after a while I began to imagine a woman moving through the crowds with a collection box, silently asking money for tsunami relief. Rome had given me my book's ruling character. She's the kind of director, the generator of all of the other stories. She's foreign, I decided, Croatian. Her name is Dubravka. She grew up in Dubrovnik in the former Yugoslavia with her abusive alcoholic father. At an early age, she was betrayed by love. She works as a baker with her cousin in her uncle's kitchen in Dubrovnik's old city. Later, she moves and works in the Islamic section of Mostar in Bosnia and Herzegovina. She prays her Roman Catholic prayers every day in a nearby mosque after washing in the traditional Muslim manner. At the sacred site of Medjugorje, where the Virgin Mary was said to have appeared to a group of children and is still appearing, according to some, she witnesses a miracle. I won't give away what brings her to Rome, where she works in a pensione on the Campo di Fiori, and where she can look out her attic windows down at the statue of Giordano Bruno. As a refresher, Bruno is the brilliant philosopher, poet, and cosmologist who was imprisoned, tortured, and burned to death by the church for his beliefs. His hooded statue stands there in the square in Campo di Fiori, the field of flowers, defiantly facing the Vatican. Bruno's most glaring sin was that he believed our solar system was not creation-centered, but only one solar system among many. And since we are creations of an infinite God, doesn't it follow that in God's infinite love, there might be other, perhaps an infinite number of others of God-made creatures, God-made creations living on other worlds? For this idea, he was killed. Like Bruno, Dubravka developed ideas of her own. She's a woman of true faith, not someone who merely follows doctrine. Both Bruno and Dubravka are fierce critics of the institution of the church and the rule of the papacy. And like Bruno, Dubravka is at odds with the Vatican. Now the book had a form of its own, as well as a second setting, Croatia and Bosnia, as well as Rome, and a pair of alternate timelines. John Paul's II's death in early April 2005, a little over 3 months after the morning of the tsunami, gave the book its logical time frame and ending. All through the novel, characters whose lives echo the narratives portrayed in Roman churches and famous pieces of art raise this question. The question of how a loving, infinite, all-powerful God could allow a tragedy like the Southeast Asian tsunami to happen. A tragedy that took the lives of over 300,000 people. How does a loving God allow the suffering and death of children, of innocents? These issues are discussed, not answered. And since I wanted Caravaggio to be very present in the novel, I created a Roman performance artist named Augustino. He's a prankster and a provocateur. He decides to dress like Caravaggio did in his own time, the early 1600s. And he now goes around Rome recreating the legends we all know about Caravaggio's wild and colorful life. Agostino gets in pretend fights. He throws dishes of artichokes at waiters. So Caravaggio, Bernini, and Bernini's great rival Borromini run throughout the book. At the novel's ending, after the Pope has died, Agostino stands on the Piazza Navona in what he feels is his final performance. Let me read a couple of paragraphs from the book. Agostino turned his thoughts back to his reasons for being on the square today, to the imperative of channeling the true native spirit of the master Caravaggio. Agostino inhaled, exhaled, swung his magnificent double-edged schiavona, presented himself to all those with eyes. He thought of his favorite painting, The Calling of St. Matthew, how he had used the youth seated closest to the viewer, the boy sitting on the bench, hand ready to strike down any intruder, as a model for his dress. That Christ and the Apostle Peter were clothed as they'd been in life was central to the work's genius. Agostino knew the anachronism was deliberate as well as telling. Caravaggio was suggesting that all of time can be simultaneous, collapsed into a single moment, and that there are single moments that can radically alter the direction of a person's life. With his sword, Agostino outlined an oval in the air. There is no past, no future, only now, this moment, Agostino thought. Only this moment, the one right here on the Piazza Navona, by the fountain of the Four Rivers, where he stood, a man very much alive, happily in his prime, proudly Roman born, baptized Agostino, though at the same time he was also Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio. I'll stop here. The rest you'll have to read. Stand in Bruno's shadow. I hope you enjoy. That's all I've got.
Tony, do you want to make some comments about being a writer?
Yes. Dominic, you were very helpful to me because in some ways you anointed me as an Italian-American writer, so I began to take it seriously. And I had a friend who's African-American who's, one of his teachers had said that it was his obligation to put something African-American in everything he wrote. And so what I tried to do in all of my books is bring in some aspect of Italianata. My father did not marry, my mother is not Italian, so, and we were very estranged from her family. So basically, my connection is with Nana and my father's two sisters, and with his side of the family, but unfortunately I didn't learn Sicilian. I can say that I'm pleased and proud to have this. What I feel as a writer is that the world dealt me three cards. Number one, they dealt me Chicago, where I was born. Lived in Chicago. Even after college, I moved back. I lived on Taylor Street. They dealt me the fact that I was 17 years of, is it 17, 14 years? It seems like 17 years of Roman Catholic education. So I got Chicago, Catholicism, and being Italian. And with those three cards, I figured if I can't figure out writing, where to go with work. I've been blessed. So all of my work, I think, has those elements. There's a little bit of Chicago. I have a Chicago in every book. And I believe my books are often about my own struggles, with faith, with belief, as opposed to the kind of doctrine that we were taught. And I think that's reflected in Bruno's shadow, the kind of battle between a true religious belief and then also a belief in an institution, the rules of the papacy. Does that cover some of what you were looking for, Dominic? Or
Okay,
did I-
very
Yeah.
good. Thank you very much. And good luck. Come back to Chicago sometime. Let us know when you're coming.
I will, and let me also congratulate all of the writers who are there. I have many of your books. I'm gonna get more of them. I've heard that this is all going to be taped and eventually put on YouTube, and I look forward to it. And I tip my hat, because I don't think it's easy to be an Italian American writer. I don't know how seriously others take the literature, but I am so glad that it is alive and thriving, and I celebrate all of you. And I'll be thinking about all of you for the rest of today. Thank you very much again for the invitation. It was a pleasure to be here.
Google him when you get a chance. He's got a dozen novels.